Hi, thank you so much for joining me for your law review and journal site checking session on Westlaw. So there are a couple of things that I want to show you today, specifically for cases and for law reviews and journals when you are site checking those kinds of sources. Any other source, if you're having difficulty, that is always a great time to email me at anna.guerra@tr.com and ask me a question. Some things like statutes or legislative materials can be really tricky no matter what. So if there is something like that that you're looking for, that you're struggling with, I'm going to highlight that content information, but searching them can always be a challenge. So you might be struggling, but don't worry, you can always message me if you have questions. So the first place that I want to take you into is a case to highlight different ways to search through a case on Westlaw. So the first place I'm going to take you into is into New York Times v. Sullivan as my example today. So here I've pulled up New York Times v. Sullivan with the citation of 84 SCT 710. That is the main case citation. I could also go back if I wanted to, if there was a pinpoint site that I was looking for. So I could type 84 SCT 725 and hit enter, and it will take me right to that specific page in New York Times v. Sullivan. So that is the first lesson that I wanted to highlight today was one, you can enter in pinpoint citation. So if you have that from an author, you can enter that in. But there are two things that I wanted to note specifically on this screen, and it's the single star and the double star and what those reference. The single star is referencing your either Supreme Court reporter or the US reporter, excuse me, or your state reporter. The double star is referencing your Supreme Court reporter or your national reporter. So that is the difference between the single star and the double star in this case here. So again, just depending on what the author cited to, you can enter in either one of those options for your research. So I did want to highlight that information. All right, I'm going to go back up to the top of New York Times v. Sullivan and show you a couple of other tools here that you can use that you've probably have seen them a bunch of times, but you've never really had to use them for any real reason. The first is the little magnifying glass icon at the top of the case. So let's say you are looking at New York Times v. Sullivan, and there's a quote that the author has in their article, and it has some specific terminology in there. And so you want to try to find that terminology. And so here I'm going to enter in the word newspaper and see if that word newspaper appears anywhere in the text of New York Times v. Sullivan. And so here you can start seeing all the different highlights of the word newspaper in New York Times v. Sullivan. And so now this will appear highlighted in green throughout the text. And I can go through that anytime I need to. And I can just kind of keep going through to see anywhere it appears highlighted in green throughout the text of the case New York Times v. Sullivan. And this is helpful if you have a quote. You don't have to enter in the search magnifying glass everything that is in the quote, just maybe one key word that you're looking for that's in the quote that can help you find that information. You can use the arrows to navigate through the article, the case here in this case, to look for those search terms. Okay, I'm going to go back up to the top again. I will remove that search. And the next place I want to go to is right here where it says go. And so this will allow you to enter in a page number that you're looking for. And so I can tell you another thing that authors will do is that they will just cite to the main citation of the case and or partly close to the case citation of where they got the text from in that particular case. So let's say, they gave you New York Times v. Sullivan, 376, 254, you got here, and then they did 265. So you could go to 265 and it would jump you to that portion of the case. And so now you can kind of scroll around to see if your search terms appear anywhere around here. Maybe they were on 265 or maybe they were somewhere around 267. So again, you can use your pinpoint citation at the go option as the actual site up here at the top. And you can combine it with an actual search within the text of the case if you needed to try to find the text within the citation, within the text of the site that you're trying to verify and check. So those are the tools that you can use to scan through a case on Westlaw. Another tool that is always here on almost all of your cases is the original PDF from the reporter. So if you needed the original image from a reporter, you didn't want to go into the law library and go to the stacks, you could pull down the original PDF image and download that into your edit. Okay, I'm going to go back to the home page. The next place that I want to take you into are content types and statutes. Now, this is the content type that I did reference that can be tricky if you are researching statutes because, again, all of our statutes can be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction content-wise. So if I'm in the US Code and I go into the historical US Code annotated, I just wanted to highlight here that our USCA coverage goes back to just 1990. So if by chance an author was citing to something from the 1980s in the US Code, a prior version of the text of the US Code annotated, you would have to go into print, you would need to go to some government online resource to try to track down that text. So I did want to highlight that. And I also wanted to highlight that other jurisdictions are all very different as well. I'm based in Louisiana, so if I clicked on Louisiana, I can see that our historical statutes go back to just the late 1980s. It actually skips 1988, not sure why, but I did want to highlight that. I could also maybe click on Georgia just to check out Georgia and see. You can actually see here for the state of Georgia, we only go back to the early 2000s. So again, every jurisdiction is different, particularly for statutes. And so that is really important to double check and make sure that what you're looking for is actually on Westlaw to begin with, or you might be searching in vain. Again, those are great times to email me and say, Anna, I'm trying to find this statute and I'm struggling. Don't hesitate to give me as much information as you can. Screenshot what it is that you're trying to cite check, and I'm happy to try to help you find what you're looking for if we have it available. All right, I'm going to go back to the home page. Now, let's say you have a source like a law review or journal article, and you are trying to find some content that was cited in that publication, either the text by the particular author, by the title. So there are a couple of things that you can do. The first is I could go to content types and go to secondary sources. And I could start looking for all of the secondary sources that we have over on the right side of the screen where it says secondary sources index. This is an alphabetical listing of all the secondary sources that we have on Westlaw. So let's say I was looking for the First Amendment law review to see if we had that on Westlaw. And so here we go. There it is, First Amendment law review. And I could start researching here. Now you could, at the very front of Westlaw, I don't know why it keeps doing that. All right, and then in the toolbar, I could just start typing First Amendment Law Review, and it will appear right there, as well as the Education Law Journal. But I'm going to click back into First Amendment Law Review to show you a couple of things here. Now, when you are in a database on Westlaw, now I am in just the First Amendment Law Review. You can click on this link over on the right side that says Advanced. Now, this link appears if you're in cases, if you're in statutes, if you're in newspapers, if you're in any kind of other, publication. But it will look different depending on what content you are in. So one of the things that I love is the field search options. And this is really in particular for law review and journal students when you are doing cite checking. So let's say the article that I'm cite checking cites to an article that has the phrase New York Times v. Sullivan in the title. So I want to look for any article, but the citation is wrong, and I can't seem to find it. So the first thing that you could try is to find any article in the First Amendment Law Review that has the word Sullivan in the title. And now you can see that it populated the search for me at the top, looking just in the titles of the articles in the First Amendment Law Review. And there are 6 of them. So here we have Sullivan Keynote Address, New York Times v. Sullivan 50 years later, Sullivan and the misdirection of the First Amendment doctrine, and so on. So this is an easy way to look for an article by the actual title of the article. I did want to go back again and just quickly remind you about checking the content and the updating of particular journals. So here I can see the 10 most recent documents were in 2024. And so this publication may publish just once a year, twice a year, not sure. Here we go. It's from UNC Law Review, full text articles, and it begins with volume 4. So that's also important to note. So let's say the author cited to something from volume number 1, 2, or 3. It's not going to be on Westlaw. You're going to have to try and find another resource to try to find and cite check that quote or that text from the article. I can also click on contents to see if there's anything else helpful for me. But this is what's really important, especially as a law review and journal student, is that you need to double check and make sure that we have the content available for you on Westlaw itself. All right, I'm going to click close, and I'm going to go back to advanced again. So we looked in the titles. The other way to search is by looking for the author of the article. So let's say I'm looking for an article and the author's last name is Messenger. I want to see all of the articles written by this particular author in the First Amendment Law Review. And Ashley Messenger has written 3 articles here about fake news, Times v. Sullivan, and New York Times v. Sullivan. So that is the other way to go through and look for your documents, is by the title, by obviously the citation if you had it. If it's wrong, you can try to access the database like we did, and then as well look by the author using the author field option. So just remember those advanced options appear for each different content type, and they are different because a case doesn't look like a statute doesn't look like a law review article, a law review article is different from a news article. So again, this is just different ways to look through information. All right, I'm going to go back to Westlaw Precision. And then the final type of materials that I did want to highlight are news articles. This is also one of the most common types of documents that are cited to in law reviews and journals. And I'm going to click on advanced here. And let's say I want to look for anything written by the author Jeff Duncan. Now, this is a time to possibly use, excuse me, a connector in your field. So I do have Jeff's name, and his last name is Duncan, but there might be a lot of Jeff Duncans out there. So I definitely want to use a first name as well. There might be lots of Duncans as authors. So I could go and add his first name, and I will use the /2 sorry, Duncan, in case he uses a middle name or he uses an initial. That will give me a little bit of leeway in looking. And let's say I need to find this article, any article written by a Jeff Duncan, anywhere in the news articles on Westlaw. All right, so Jeff Duncan has written a lot of articles here in the Baton Rouge Advocate, NOLA.com. And so you can look through any of his articles here. Obviously, there are almost 5,000 of them. So you could do a search within results if there was something else that you wanted to narrow the search by and try to find information specifically that he wrote on that was quoted. So I could, type in LSU, see if he wrote anything about LSU. See if it drops that list from 4991 down to any reasonable amount for me to go through. And it did, it dropped it down to 866. I can now see where LSU is highlighted in purple throughout the documents. I could add some additional searches. It's going to keep building on, or I can remove everything and change anything else that I want to add. So that is how you can search in news articles by the author, as well as by the text within the results that you also get. I could also, if I knew what specific newspaper that they were researching, or writing that I was researching. So let's say I was looking for the Old New Orleans Times-Picayune. I could narrow my result that way, but Jeff Duncan has obviously written in quite a few newspapers locally, Louisiana. So here I could also just search in the New Orleans Times-Picayune, go back to advanced, and then use my Jeff /2 Duncan and do my search directly just in the New Orleans Times-Picayune. I know it wasn't the Advocate. I know it wasn't NOLA.com. Well, it's changed to NOLA.com now, so it's included. But here we go, and you can see all of his articles that were just in the New Orleans-based newspaper. So those were the things that I wanted to show you today. I hope that this was helpful in giving you some ideas of new ways to look for the edits that you're working on and trying to find the sources and be able to verify those. Thank you so much. And again, remember, don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions. And thank you so much.